Welcome to the Forever in Their Hearts podcast with Dale Martin Jr., brought to you by Martin Brothers, providing funerals designed and customized to be as special as your loved one lost. Now, here's your host.
Well, yes, this is your host, Erik Reynolds, and I'm here again with Valerie Martell, Director of Operations for Martin Brothers Funeral Services. And today, Valerie is going to talk about disenfranchised grief, or more simply, grief that people feel they can't express for a variety of reasons. Now, before Valerie joins us, just as a reminder that if you have questions or require assistance, you can always reach Martin Brothers Funeral Services in Vancouver at 778-330-7799. Again, that's 778-330-7799. Well, Valerie, it's great to have you on the call again today.
Nice to talk to you, Erik.
Well, and Valerie, this is a very interesting topic because there are many widely recognized forms of grief, and most people have experienced the loss of a loved one, gotten through the grieving process. But our topic today covers something a little more in-depth and perhaps something not easily understood. So let me ask you, what exactly is disenfranchised grief, and when would someone typically experience it?
Well, you know, Erik, it's kind of a big term for something that happens quite frequently. So disenfranchised grief is the kind of grief that we feel when we can't express our grief, or we feel we can't express our grief due to the nature of the loss. And, you know, it's a grief that you might be afraid to express for fear that other people are going to judge you for it. So, for example, you might grieve the loss of your ex-spouse, okay? So you've divorced someone years ago and they die, and you still feel some grief connected to their death. You might feel grief, because one of your loved ones died from a suicide, or, you know, they've died due to their involvement in a crime, or you might feel grief at the loss of a pet, the loss of a job. Often, people feel disenfranchised grief when someone has lost an infant due to miscarriage, or, you know, even the loss of an aged parent or grandparent. You know, these are the types of grief that other people don't necessarily recognize that we should be grieving for. You know, they can be those tough times. You know, somebody loses a baby to a miscarriage and people are callous and say, you know, they don't mean to be callous, but they say things like, well, at least you can have other children. At least you can get pregnant again. Well, you know, at the time of that loss, that mother and that father are feeling a great deal of grief that they feel they can't necessarily express outwardly because, you know, other people aren't taking it so seriously. Same thing when somebody loses an aged parent or a grandparent, and, you know, they feel the loss. They feel grief connected to that. And people say to them, you know, wow, they lived to a ripe old age. Didn't they have a great life? Yeah, that's all true. But you know what? You're still feeling that loss, and you feel, you know, sometimes that you can't cry or you can't mourn because people expect you to move on a little quicker for some of these things. So that's really what disenfranchised grief is all about.
Well, now, Valerie, how can someone mourn a loss that others don't recognize?
Well, first of all, people have to realize that it's always okay to express their grief. Keeping it inside doesn't help a person. It's important to express it, in fact. And, you know, there are ways to commemorate a loved one that don't include a large gathering. You always have those support people in your life, those people that are going to stick with you no matter what. And those are the people that can join you in a commemoration of sorts. You know, ask your funeral director. I've often helped families commemorate or remember someone for whom they felt they couldn't grieve. It's, you know, we can put something together. That's not a problem. And, you know, always remember the function and the purpose of the funeral. The funeral is a safe place to cry. It's a safe place to express your grief and a safe place to seek support. So, you know, whether you're at a celebration of life for an aged grandparent and you feel sad, even though it seems to be a festive affair. You know, often we have these celebrations of life and, you know, there are happy occasions, celebrating a long life and all that. If you feel sad, if you feel you need to cry, that's okay. You can do that. And people will understand. You don't have to feel like you're kind of an oddball because everyone else is celebrating a life and you're crying for this person. That's quite all right. it's also important that a person realizes that, even personally, they can develop a ritual or a ceremony that helps them express their grief. And you can ask me, if you're sitting in front of me as a client, how do I do this? How do I develop that? So, that's something that people have to realize that they can do.
Now, you mentioned the word ritual. Let's talk about that a little bit. First of all, what is a ritual? And then what makes an effective ritual?
Well, a ritual is something that involves gestures or words or objects that have a personal, individual meaning. So, for example, the funeral itself is a ritual. We make that movement. We attend, words are spoken, so there's sound, there's movement, and, we have a casket or an urn present, that actual tangible object. We have the body there in the casket or the cremated remains in the urn. We have photos of the deceased and possibly some memorial objects, things that meant something to the deceased. And it means that we are commemorating the life of someone who we've loved and someone who we've lost, and we have all those objects and we have all that stuff around and those feelings. So, visiting the grave is a ritual. Placing flowers on a grave is a ritual. There's action to that, there's movement, and there's meaning behind it. Ritual can involve a taste or a smell that reminds you of a person that you've lost. For instance, when I've planned funerals for people in the past, we've talked about this, and some families will request things like having, Dad's cologne sprayed on him or sprayed on even the memorial cards, so that when people come in, they smell, what they remember a person smelling like. And it's kind of it's subtle, but it's interesting. People will sort of take note of that. It's reassuring, and it's, it makes you feel close to that person. Other times, families have said, Grandma was the only person who made these particular cookies, and if I smell that type of cookie, I know that, I'm comforted. That was always throughout my life that we had these cookies when Grandma was around. And she taught such and such a granddaughter or grandson to make these cookies. Is it okay if we bring? Absolutely. So, the family will bring that type of cookie and hand it out at the door, and everybody that's at the service is either holding that cookie in their hand, or throughout the time they're listening to the service, they're eating that cookie and they're thinking of Grandma. And, it's a real connection. So that's a ritual in itself. It's that physical, meaningful, tangible something that we can hold on to. Just a note, too, that ritual has to have some meaning. But the meaning behind it doesn't have to be universal. It can be very much individual. For example, people often see that movement of placing roses on the casket, or throwing roses down into the grave, or throwing roses into the ocean, for instance, if you're scattering at sea. And, people will sometimes say, what does that mean? And you know what? It doesn't have to mean the same thing to everybody. It can mean that you're giving the person that last something. It can mean a symbol of respect. It can mean whatever you want it to mean. And, by someone labeling that as roses on the grave mean such and such, that doesn't hold anything. It's what it means to you, and that's what's important. So that's what ritual is all about. It's that movement, that gesture, that object that have personal, individual meaning, and that kind of helps you to move you forward in your grief.
Well, now, once the funeral is over, what if I don't feel that I have the support I need, but I'm still grieving? What is there that I can do in that situation?
Well, certainly you can always ask us. We are, used to dealing with people that are grieving, and we have in place in our funeral home a grief recovery program. And what that is it's a program where people can meet. It usually runs around 6 weeks, and it runs once a week. And people can come and they can learn about how to, resolve their grief. It's not just getting together to talk about, here's what happened to me, and here's where I'm at. And the program really assists people to move them forward in their grief and start working through it. And it gives you those practical tools that you need to do just that, to start working through your grief. Because grief in reality is very much a functional thing. It's nothing that really stands still, hopefully anyway. People can do things. They can use the tools that we can provide through that program to move forward in their grief. Ask us. That's the one thing that we like to try to get through to families, is that our care doesn't stop after the funeral. We genuinely care what happens with you after the funeral. So, it doesn't matter if it's a day later or a week later or months later or even years later. We're always there. You can always call on us and count on us, too, to help move you in the right direction. Sometimes what happens after a funeral is those people that are close to you, and, they've said, if you need anything, call on me. You kind of feel like, oh, should I do it? Should I not? And they don't know. They're like, oh, should I call the person? Should I not call? People kind of don't know where you sit as far as that goes. So it's important that, number one, you use your resources that you have in place. And, should you not even have those resources in place? Let's say, everyone has moved on to where they might be from far away or whatever it is, and you don't feel you can contact people. We have, all sorts of professionals that we can call on and that we can refer you to, that maybe you just need to talk to someone a little bit. And sometimes it's as simple as coming into the funeral home and having a chat with me. And not that I'm going to assist you to completely get over your grief, but sometimes you just need to have a little chat with someone who understands what you've gone through, with someone that you don't have to explain things to. So, it can be as simple as that, and it can be as complicated as whatever. We can certainly help you. So, that's something that people have to realize, is that they can call on us at any point in time.
Now, Valerie, before we finish the call today, do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share?
Yeah, I do, Eric. I want people to remember that the funeral, the memorial, the gathering, whatever you call it, is a safe place to grieve. And, it's good to let your feelings out, no matter how you're feeling. If you feel that, people aren't going to understand that you're grieving for someone or something, that's okay. It's, no one's going to judge you for that. It's a safe place to get your feelings out. And it's okay to grieve other losses at a funeral. So, for instance, you might be at the funeral of a friend's mother that you didn't know. You're just there to support your friend. And it brings back memories of your grandmother or your mother who died. That's okay to grieve there, and it doesn't matter that you're not grieving that same loss. It's just the idea that that a funeral is a safe place to grieve, and that's okay. And the other thing I want to get across is that we're always available. So, call on us at any time.
Well, Valerie, thank you for sharing your experience and knowledge. I know this can really help families as they're going through the grieving process, even if they may feel disenfranchised. Now, for our listeners, can you think of someone who might benefit from what we've covered here today? Do me a favor, do yourself a favor, do them a favor, forward this episode to them. I promise you they'll thank you for it. And if you have questions or require assistance, like Valerie said so eloquently, Martin Brothers Funeral Services can be here for you, and you can reach them in Vancouver at 778-330-7799. Again, that's 778-330-7799, or visit their website at www.mbfunerals.com. Again, that's www.mbfunerals.com. Valerie, as always, thanks so much for the call.
Thanks, Eric.
You've been listening to the Forever in Their Hearts podcast with Dale Martin Jr. from Martin Brothers Funeral Services. Our 4 generations of service in the funeral profession have equipped us with a legacy of understanding. In your hour of need, Martin Brothers is there. Call Martin Brothers in Vancouver today at 778-330-7799 and visit them online at www.mbfunerals.com.